Rural Pennsylvania, a canvas of darkness. Night had fallen. Darkness blanketed the rural Pennsylvania landscape. Trees became menacing figures, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching towards the lone car on the deserted highway. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the unsettling silence of the woods. The only sound was the rhythmic swoosh of the car cutting through the thick, humid air. The car's headlights flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and coil like living things. The driver, a young man named David, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. He was alone, utterly alone, in a darkness that felt as vast and unknowable as the night sky above. David had heard the stories, whispered in hushed tones around campfires and in dimly lit bars. Stories of a lonely crossroads deep in the heart of Pennsylvania, where a figure lurked in the shadows, a figure with a smile that chilled you to the bone. They called him the Smiling Man. Some dismissed it as folklore, a spooky tale to scare kids. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach, David felt a shiver of unease. His grandmother had warned him, her voice trembling with fear. "Never stop at the crossroads after dark, David, especially not at that crossroads." He had scoffed then, but now, as the darkness pressed in around him, her words echoed in his mind with chilling clarity. He wished he had listened. He wished he had taken another route, but it was too late now. A sputtering cough from the engine shattered the silence. The car lurched violently. The headlights flickered once and died, plunging David into absolute darkness. The engine sputtered again like a dying gasp, and then silence descended, heavy and absolute. He was stranded. Panic clawed at his throat, a living thing threatening to consume him. He fumbled for his phone, but the battery icon blinked mockingly at him. Dead. He was trapped in the abyss, his car a metal coffin under the watchful gaze of the silent trees. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one echoing loudly in the confines of the car. He had to get out, find help. But the stories, the warnings, held him captive. He was frozen, caught between the terror of the unknown and the dread of what he might find outside. A sound, barely audible at first, reached him. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the road behind him. His blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, but he was rooted to his seat, paralyzed by fear. The footsteps grew louder, closer, each one a hammer blow to his sanity. He didn't want to look, but some unseen force compelled him to turn his head. And then he saw him. Standing just beyond the reach of the car's taillights, shrouded in darkness, was a figure, tall and gaunt, with an unnatural stillness about him. His face, barely visible in the gloom, was stretched into a grotesque grin, a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. The Smiling Man. Section 5. A ghastly grin. Unveiling the face of terror. The figure took a step closer, and the faint light from the taillights glinted off a pair of eyes that glinted with an unnatural light. They weren't the eyes of a man. They were something else, something cold and predatory, devoid of any trace of humanity. The smile widened, revealing a set of teeth that were too sharp, too long, like that of a wolf. David wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but no sound escaped his lips. His body was locked in a prison of terror, his mind reeling from the sheer horror of what he was witnessing. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to seep into his very being. He was trapped, ensnared in the web of a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Section 6. Trapped in his gaze. The Paralyzing Fear. The Smiling Man moved closer, his movements fluid and silent, like a predator stalking its prey. Each step was agonizingly slow, a deliberate torment designed to savor David's fear. He was close enough now for David to see the grime beneath his long yellow fingernails, to smell the stench of decay that clung to him like a shroud. David tried to avert his gaze, but it was no use. The smiling man's eyes held him captive, boring into his soul. The smile never wavered, a grotesque parody of human emotion that seemed to mock his terror. He wanted to believe he was hallucinating, that this was some cruel trick played by his exhausted mind. But deep down, he knew the truth. The smiling man was real, and he was here for him. Section 7. No escape at the crossroads. The inevitable fate. The smiling man reached the car. His hand, skeletal and pale, rose to touch the window. David flinched, a whimper escaping his lips. The figure paused, tilting his head as if studying a particularly interesting insect. Then slowly, deliberately, he tapped on the window. The sound was sharp, piercing, shattering the silence like a gunshot. Panic surged through David, raw and consuming. He fumbled for the door handle, but his hand wouldn't obey. He was frozen, a prisoner in his own body. The smiling man continued to tap on the window, his smile widening with each tap. It wasn't a smile of amusement, David realized with chilling certainty, but a smile of anticipation. Section 8. Claimed by the night. A soul lost to the smiling man. The smiling man gestured towards the road behind him. His meaning was clear. Get out. David knew he had no choice. He was powerless to resist the silent command. He stumbled out of the car, his legs shaking so violently he could barely stand. As he turned to face his tormentor, he saw the crossroads. He had driven straight into the heart of the legend. It was too late for regret, too late for prayers. He was caught in the smiling man's web, and there was no escape. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the smile. It was wider now, more grotesque than ever, and it seemed to stretch from one end of the world to the other. Section 9. Echoes of Horror. The legend lives on. The next morning, the car was found abandoned at the crossroads. Its engine cold, its driver vanished. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of where David might have gone. He was just gone. Another soul swallowed by the legend of the smiling man. The story of David's disappearance spread like wildfire through the rural communities, whispered in hushed tones, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked at the edges of their world. The legend of the smiling man had claimed another victim. Section 10. Beware the crossroads, where smiles harbor darkness. And so, the legend lives on. A cautionary tale whispered around campfires and in the dead of night. A reminder that some roads are best left untraveled, some smiles best left unmet. Beware the crossroads after dark, for the smiling man might be waiting, and his smile, though seemingly harmless, is a harbinger of terror, a promise of an unspeakable fate that awaits those unfortunate souls who cross his path. The darkness holds its breath, listening for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon the crossroads. The smiling man is patient. He can wait. He has eternity.